Hi, this is Glenn Kaiser with the Dolby Institute, and we're here at Dolby Soho in New York City. It's always a pleasure to be back in New York. I'm here at the table with a couple of old friends of mine, Tom Fleischman, Eugene Gearty. Thanks for coming on the show.
Welcome. Thank you. It's our pleasure.
Absolutely. It's we're here to talk about The Irishman, but just to introduce you guys before we get started, Eugene and Tom, obviously you guys both Oscar winners for the same movie. You guys got your Oscar for Hugo for Mr. Scorsese. So this is a long working relationship that you guys have had with Martin and Thelma and the whole team. How long have you guys been working with?
For me, it goes back to King of Comedy, so it's been about 25 or 30 years, something like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What was your job on King of Comedy?
I was the second re-recording mixer.
You were just a young pup back then.
I was about, I was 33 or something like that. I had done some temp mixes on Raging Bull, and I guess Marty liked them. So the next, Dick Vorsek, who was my mentor and my guru, had some health problems and couldn't work any overtime. And Marty obviously liked to work into the evening. So Dick would come in at 9 o'clock and start the day, and I would roll in around noon and work with him all afternoon. And then Dick would leave at 6, and I would go as late as Marty wanted to go.
And you and Marty kept going.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. On Raging Bull.
No, that was on King of Comedy. I had just done a couple of temp mixes on Raging Bull.
And Eugene, when did you start working with Marty?
I started on New York Stories. There was 3 directors, New York directors, Francis Coppola, Woody Allen, and Martin Scorsese had
There was short films.
short films.
Yeah.
And Marty's was called Life Lessons, which was this great,
Nick Nolte and Rosanna Arquette.
yeah, this great piece with them, and it centered around The Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum, the piece. It's just fantastic. But that was my first film with Marty, and then I kind of went away for a few films, and Bringing Out the Dead was when Phil Stockton and I became sort of a tag team, and it's been everyone since then, so I lost track. But,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a good run.
yeah,
We like it. We like it when directors are loyal to their sound teams.
Yes, it's very nice.
Yeah.
So I guess with that tease up a question that I was wondering, which is, has Marty's approach to sound changed over the years aesthetically? Like, has there been a progression for him?
I don't know. I think that, he's obviously very keen on music and very keen. I mean, here's the thing. He'll come in on the first day of the mix and he'll say to me, Tom, I want to hear the dialogue, and I want to hear the music, and I want to hear the sound effects. So it's a matter of finding what's
But not all at the same
Not
time.
all at the same time. We've got to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
But there's always one moment that at any given moment in a film, there's always one thing that's the most important thing to hear.
Right.
So whether it's a line of dialogue or a drum beat or a guitar note or a sound effect, he very often will build the music that way to fit, to work with the dialogue in a certain way that, either helps tell the story. Obviously, it always helps tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this one in particular is unique in his canon of work, or certainly the way I've experienced his creative process. All his movies, like Tom said, certainly music is a very key component to telling the story. And very much times, like Shutter Island and other movies, sound effects are a very big part of the storytelling.
Sure. It just depends on what the story is.
Yeah, and in this one, it was just pretty much the opposite. The story was so important to be between these people and their emotions that he really wanted it to be very quiet, very subtle. Everything was pulled back as opposed to pushed forward to tell the story. It was how effectively can we make this more intimate? How much more can we go?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think I was really surprised when I saw the film, and I've seen it now a couple of times. It's stylistically, to me, feels very different from, and certainly his other gangster movies.
Right.
There's not a lot of flashy camera work. The filmmaking process doesn't really call attention to itself that much. it's really about, like you said, it's about quiet and it's about intimacy. And I think these actors are doing some of the finest work I've ever seen them do.
Well, I think that's part of the reason why he wanted to approach it that way, because the performances in this film are so amazing, just with even just looks, not even spoken lines, just the way that they're looking at each other. And both he and Thelma were really adamant about having nothing in the soundtrack that would interfere with that,
Right.
with a focus on the performances and the story and the dialogue. So there's many key scenes in the film that take place in a quiet room, in a hotel room, or a quiet restaurant where no one else is there. And they really were not interested in hearing any kind of off-screen sound textures that would interfere with the audience focusing purely on the characters.
So you say that, I'm thinking specifically about the scene between Joe Pesci and De Niro when they're in the motel and they're having breakfast, and it's basically when Pesci tells De Niro he's got to go kill Jimmy Hoffa, but he doesn't actually say it.
Frank, I had to put you into this thing, or you would never let it happen. And I know you wouldn't. But it's gonna happen. Either way, he's going.
There's so much subtext happening there, and I understand what you're talking about. Like, the focus is so simple. You know, you're not from a sound editorial perspective. You're not putting dogs barking in the back. You know, all that stuff that we would normally kind of put in to fill out a world.
Yeah.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about. Was that part of your conversations with Marty through the entire process? Was knowing that it was going to be that spare?
Not originally. When I started working on it and feeding them sound effects for their temp mixes, that wasn't apparent at the time. But Thelma did many times. She reiterated, Eugene, this one's going to be a little different. And
You're talking about Thelma Schoonmaker, the
sorry.
picture editor who's also worked with him since Raging Bull.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm first
Even
name
before
basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it became really apparent when Thelma came in and said, look, this is really important to us to keep it the way our temp sounds. This is really his ideas that he's developed already, and we want to match that, follow that as much as possible. It's funny you brought up that particular scene.
That we had some problems with that scene because there was a
Pesci's eating cereal, which is
Yes.
that was one
a
of
lot
the
of mouth
problems.
noises.
Joe Pesci was chewing on the cereal. through the
Everybody
whole
loves
thing.
mouth noises, right?
And
Sets my
and there
teeth.
was there was something in the room that was humming.
Yeah, there was a Jenny.
So there was a really heavy hum.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because, I think the dirty little secret in our business is, like, just you can put some explosions or gunshots and something. You can mask any kinds of problems, but like, you don't have anything
There
to hide
was
behind.
nowhere to hide.
So you've got those production tracks better be great.
Well, they weren't
They
necessarily.
weren't.
I mean, they were good.
But a lot of it's on location.
Todd Maitland did
real,
a great job.
Yes.
Real location.
In that particular scene, there was some problems. And one of them was the cereal, was the chewing, because he was chewing on Bob's angle. So we were seeing Bob and hearing him, chomping away. And Phil Stockton had to do quite a bit of surgery there to try and get that stuff out.
So Phil Stockton was cutting dialogue
Yes.
on your
Yeah.
team?
Yes.
Okay.
And for my part, I was trying to get rid of the noise, the hum, without affecting the quality of their voices.
So was it like just an air conditioner
It
or
was,
something?
I don't know if it was a soda, it was something, some
it
kind,
like
it sounded like a refrigerator or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
And but here's the tricky part. Tom and Phil very much did their job to notch that out, or pretty obviously. But from the perspective of the filmmakers, they were really concerned that any affecting the voices was going to take away the importance of that scene.
I see. So they don't want you to do anything that's gonna notch and take out
These
take
guys
out frequencies
did
from the
all
voice.
that.
I mean, Thelma was adamant about it. You know, no, it's too much EQ. You
Right.
know, it
You can't
doesn't-
get it too clean because you're
It
going to affect
doesn't
the quality of
sound.
the voice.
His voice doesn't have the same quality as our temp.
I mean, this was
And in the temp, you know, they hadn't really done any cleaning.
It's just the production tracks,
It was
right?
a
Right.
production track. So we eventually wound up actually using the tracks from the temp, from the
Interesting.
AAF that were put into the temp. And
Now, how much of that is just because Marty and Thelma get used to something in the Avid and they can't.
and that again. This you can't imagine you pick a more explosive scene to discuss. There was a lot of discussion, and I use that word. There was a lot of
It got
yelling.
tense.
Animated discussion. Yeah.
But
You
because
New Yorkers do like to yell at each other. on
yeah,
mixing
it was a
stage.
really fascinating process, and I had sort of a catbird seat because we really didn't have any sound effects in that scene at all initially. But then we tried a process, which was to clean it up considerably and then put Foley in and to make it, we thought, more intimate, but that wasn't working. Philip did a pass with noise reduction in his machine. Tom did more than one pass of noise of using isotope and just going back and just basic EQ, and that was still affecting it from their perspective. And it's fascinating to see that the sensitivity to, and I think they're right. You know,
Yeah.
of course we're going to do our job.
You have to.
Yeah.
But
And a scene like that is the hardest kind of scene to mix, where
Well,
you've got
yeah.
nothing to hide. But you know,
Right.
they didn't want to have any kind of outside presence. They didn't want to add any kind of room tone.
They're not gonna put any
It was a
music on it,
completely
no.
empty room. It was supposed to be 6 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
and no one was there. The character Russell Buffalino had actually owned the Howard Johnson's and had shut it down so that they could have this conversation in private.
interesting. Okay.
And so, you know, a scene like that from a mixer's point of view, you know, where you're cutting between two angles or three angles that one of them had a big hum in it and the other one was
They're
cleaner.
not gonna match. No.
And you know, to try and find a way to get that to work without having any kind of background to hide behind was really a challenge.
And did you mix by yourself?
I did. Well, Gene worked. I
In
handled
that
the-
scene.
Yeah, Gene.
No effects to mix, right? So
Gene-
did you mixed effects?
I did.
Gene mixed
Okay.
effects, and I did dialogue and music. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and there's no music in that sequence, obviously.
No music in that scene.
But-
no music in that whole reel.
Right, but again, to reiterate, it's not just there's nothing to hide behind. It's not just we're trying to do as little as possible as Tom would do with his mixing and his EQ. It's that they didn't want that little bit of basic smoothing out of tracks. Well, we did that, of course, but it's still, you'd be surprised how far from the concept of doing your job we were being, going in that direction.
It's interesting. So it's almost like you guys have to make the adjustment of like, this is the
Totally.
world we're living in.
Yeah.
That we have to accept.
It was a huge learning experience for me.
Yeah.
I've said this in a couple interviews. We've been doing this 30 plus years. You kind of know where you start, and this was a whole new learning experience for what not to do, how to be effective with one thing at a very specific time. It wasn't part of the story.
Right.
I mean, birds were not part of that story, and that was going to take them out of that moment of
Yeah,
where the
yeah,
emotion between those two characters was amazing. So, and when there was birds necessary or crickets, they were in certain scenes that were important. But it's
there are a
fascinating.
couple of, there are some really nice. I would think of them as design moments, but like I'm thinking about there's the scene with the guy when he's given the payoff to the state trooper.
Yeah.
And you're under the overpass,
That
and
was
that
fun.
was like that.
Yeah.
That was a really lovely.
That was actually one of the scenes where we did use Atmos.
Yeah, give it a little height,
One
give it
of
a
the
little
few
space.
scenes. Yeah, we put those car buys up in the ceiling.
Yeah.
That was a nice moment, and as I understand it, I had originally sent similar material over to them early on because that scene didn't have music in it yet. What I recall happening early on was that there wasn't going to be a lot of music in certain scenes, score, I should say.
Right.
The other one is the Schuylkill montage where the guns are dropped off into the river.
Sure. Yeah.
That initially was no music also.
Really?
Yeah.
Over a montage sequence?
Yeah, and
Interesting.
we did a lot with effects. It was all about the cutting and the cars and all that. But again, the underpass was another one, and that worked out great because Robbie's score does come in the middle of that, I think, and it was great because of that tonal idea of the overpass, the joiner thumps and stuff like that. And
Well, you also, it's a quiet, intimate, very specific mix, but you found some really great opportunities to play with dynamic range and silence. I'm thinking specifically of that great scene. I think it's part of a montage as well, when Jimmy Hoffman's wife Jo gets fired from her union job, and she's walking out and there's whatever that song is playing. There's a great song that's playing,
I can't remember the name.
and then she gets in the car, and right when she's about to turn on the ignition, the music stops abruptly, and as an audience member watching that scene, I'm like jarred for a second. Then I'm like, oh, she's thinking maybe the car's going to blow up.
Oh yeah.
When she turns this ignition, and that the rest of that sequence, there's a long beat of almost near silence.
Absolutely.
And as an audience member, you kind of like for me, I was
There's a close-up
intrigued.
of the key, and it's
jingling.
jingling just slightly.
Yeah, but again, there's a good case in point. Now, most people would put that jingling at a certain level. And this was down 15 dB from that. And it becomes more intimate because it's not so obvious that you barely hear that jingle. And that was very intentional.
Sure.
The level I mixed it in at was a little more than that, and but it definitely was more effective, even quieter.
And there was definitely some moments with De Niro with his, scotch and soda with the ice cube. Like there's just this it's really subtle, really nice, very specific kind of work.
Some of my favorite moments in the mix were where they crushing Dorfman's car, and the Johnny Ray song just comes blasting in. You see this crane come down and pick the car up, and Johnny Ray is singing "Cry."
Yeah.
Right.
And also the slow-mo of the Joe Colombo killing with Sleepwalk playing.
Right.
And that's the one gunshot.
One gunshot.
And then the second gunshot isn't there. It's like,
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
on-camera visual without a sound.
Yeah.
And you're jolted by the prior gunshot, which you don't see.
Right.
You don't see the gun. You hear it,
hear
and then
the
we
shot.
cut to the guy.
And you just see the blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, again, very interesting dynamic range choices, very effective. One big one was the cut to the meeting in Florida between Tony Pro and Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
We worked on that scene quite a bit, that transition to that cut being dead quiet and that silence being deafening.
Well, because the point is Jimmy Hoffa's pissed because he's getting,
Yeah, and he's
waiting.
Yeah, and he doesn't want to wait more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They have that argument.
Right. Yeah.
So that cut was very effective in the sound dropping out completely, and then slowly giving this idea of tension through bringing back some of the sound effects.
but at the same time, they also wanted to establish that they were in Florida. So, we put in a
interesting.
little bit of a seagull and maybe some palms rustling or something like that.
But we tried quite a bit of stuff. One thing we've said in our interviews is that it's easy when you see the car and hear the car. It's when you have to come up with this idea of subtlety that's extreme subtlety, and that's equally as challenging. I mean, we spent quite a long time on that scene, getting it quiet enough and get what the right background was, and it wasn't. I don't think I was capable of coming up with the perfect sound the first time. We really developed the idea over time. Thelma, Tommy, and I, and then we presented that to Marty, and I'm sure we had changes after that.
And that scene was another one where the production track wasn't particularly quiet. So we had to,
Noisy
we had to be
locations.
careful about how much noise reduction we used.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, because, there's not a lot of violence in the film, and I think another way that this is different from kind of a lot of Marty's films in the past is that it's not stylized at all. When De Niro shoots somebody, it's often played in a wide shot, and he just walks up and bang, bang.
Right.
And so that lack of kind of over the topness from an aesthetic point on the visual side you must have had to take a similar approach with the sound, right?
Absolutely. That's a really good point. The gunshots themselves, it was very straightforward. And a number of Marty's films, we've stylistically made the guns big, and
Sure.
Casino comes to mind, or that stylized cutting that they've done in some of their films. This was pretty much the opposite of that. The guns were, in most cases, were always sweetened with recordings that I had, but we used production because they were using production for other things. For instance, the screaming when Joe Geller
gets shot, there's
Sure.
production track, there's dialogue, he's,
A lot of
he's,
extras in
he's
the
shouting,
restaurant.
people are screaming, there's movement. So they wanted to keep all that, obviously, and then production gunshots were in there.
Yeah.
Which is basically just blanks, or what is that?
They were quarter loads or whatever, yeah.
Okay.
And yeah,
I'm sure they're still loud as hell, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're loud, but
They're
they're very
good.
sharp, they're like more like pops.
Yeah. It definitely needed sweetening. But I think what we're saying, or Tom's trying to say, is that in every scene, it's the opposite what you would think. A big crowd scene, you would think, oh, those extras are moving their lips and we're going to fill it in with group ADR. No, it was all track. It was all production track. They were yelling and screaming in those bars.
Oh, but even, I'm thinking about like even some of the big union rallies with Hoffa.
Yeah, it's production track.
That's production track, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, very little group ADR, very little. Just
Wow.
a couple of places.
So
Right.
really your job was like, here's this box of stuff, clean it up to the extent that you're able, but really
Or
just-
don't clean it up too much.
But you had to make this work
Yeah.
with what you got.
Yeah, we kind of approached it that way at one point. I think it was the scene in the breakfast scene. It's like, why don't we just treat this? We have these 3 tracks in front of us. Let's make them sound as good as we can. And that's the style it is.
In a way, you almost have to kind of approach it like a documentary.
Yeah,
Right.
that scene, I thought Tom and Phil were going that direction.
Yeah.
That this was like you said, a documentary, or almost like if it has a style, it's like a foreign film.
Right. Right.
Very quiet. The sound is there for a very specific reason, or it's not there at all.
And yet it's interesting to me. I mean, obviously people pay attention to the length of the film. It is quite long, at 3 hours and
Right.
40 or 30.
3:30.
3:29.
3:29.
But that's a heck of a credit sequence. So it's a 3-hour movie.
Yeah, it's like a 9. It's like
You
a
can get up and
9-minute
leave.
credit scene. But at the end of it, I was like, I could do another hour of this.
Yeah.
And you guys were able to keep it engaged, and obviously that's about the performance.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But it's really amazing work. I wanted to ask you guys, because a lot of people pay attention to the de-aging from a visual effects standpoint. And I know that you guys had some conversations about about treating the vocals the same way, because obviously
Yeah.
a 70-year-old man,
Yeah.
the timbre and quality of his voice is very different than when he was 40. So tell me a little
Well-
bit about that and what you guys did.
I started by going back and listening to scenes from Serpico and King of Comedy.
That's a good point. These guys are all famous actors with long careers, so you got a
Right.
lot of stuff that you can go back.
So I went back to
listen
that, and I
see
listened
what
to
the
those
voices
scenes,
sounded
and
like.
I had a plug-in that I tried that was supposed to do something with it. One of the problems was the gravelly,
Right.
raspy quality of De Niro's voice. And this was supposed to help that, and it didn't really work. I tried pitch changing, which, I experimented a little bit with that, and it wasn't right. It was too extreme. They kind of sounded a little chipmunky.
Right.
So what wound up happening in the end was that Phil Stockton went in and surgically took out a lot of the breathing between the lines, between the words from De Niro, which really helped make him sound younger.
Because your breath, your
It's,
voice gets
the
more
rasp-
breathy.
Yes, the
Interesting.
breathiness. He tried to remove as much as he could of that, and he did a little bit of just a slight pitch change, and that worked. They were happy with that. So
And
that's
was it
what we went-
mostly De Niro, or did you have to do the
It was
same thing with
mostly
Pesci?
De Niro. They did a little bit with, nothing with Pesci, because Pesci was already older,
Right.
but a little bit with Pacino, I think. There were a couple of places where, but even with Pacino, for the most part, it was just straight as it was.
Yeah.
But lion's share of the work was with De Niro, because his voice is, just generally, even when he was young, it was kind of raspy.
Right.
And also, it was only in the first part of the film that we had to do that.
Sure.
The first hour or so
Right.
was where that technique was used, and then we just left it after that.
I'm curious about process with Marty and Thelma and how the mixes work. Did you guys were there temps or?
Thelma does her temps.
So she does them
with her associate editor Scott Brock. They
Okay.
do them together. She does them in the Lightworks.
She still cuts on a Lightworks?
She's still cutting on the Lightworks,
That's amazing.
and she won't give it up. But that's good. You know, that's
Hey,
what she does.
You know, the artist has her tools.
If it ain't
Exactly.
broke, don't fix it.
So she's temping stuff in just in her Lightworks.
She's
Right.
temping in the Lightworks, so we wind up coming to the mix with her temp,
Right.
which is basically our Bible.
Right.
know,
And are you feeding her sound effects?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, quite a bit. We worked this way on a number of films where Marty really wants sound effects as part of his cutting and developing the cut, and then they'll screen that in their screening room and make changes or whatever.
But that's really smart because the last thing you want is for them to go off and do their own thing, and then
Right.
you come along to put something new in. and
yeah,
everybody's
that just doesn't work. And we've kind of figured that
It's been a struggle through all of the movies.
right. Yeah.
I mean, this is something that is ongoing and has always been a bit of a struggle with us, is that they get locked into what's in their
Sure.
temp, and when they hear something new or something is suddenly in stereo that was in mono,
Yeah.
and it's not the same, they often object to it. And then once we get started, I'll do a dialogue pre-dub. Phil and I'll sit and do a dialogue pre-dub, and then Gene comes in, Jennifer Dunnigan comes in with the music, and we'll put it together so that it makes sense to us. Thelma will come in and then critique that,
Right.
and she knows what Marty wants. So she will guide us through that to get
So-
it to a point where she feels it's enough to present to him.
Thelma and Marty, their taste is pretty she knows what he's going to respond to.
She knows,
Yeah.
yeah, well, they've been working on this for like a year,
Right. Yeah.
right? And they've been temping it, and he's been approving all of that, and he's been setting the balances
So
between
first,
the
you
dialogue.
got to
and
make Thelma happy.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. We have to make Thelma happy, and then Marty will come in, and we go through it again.
Which is understandable because she
She's not always right, but most of the time she is.
she doesn't want to get yelled at.
Yeah. Yeah. And so do you see Marty? You don't see Marty until the final mix? then?
We see Marty at the final, yeah.
And does he love to hang out on the dub stage and watch you guys work, or is he one of those directors that shows up every third day for a playback and gives some notes, or how does that work?
He usually comes in when
the
we have
afternoon.
something ready to show him,
Okay.
and he'll come in after lunch, and sometimes we'll work into the evening. Usually our sessions with him are, 4 to 6 hours generally. When he was younger, he would stay later.
Yeah.
And that's true for all of us.
Sure.
But that's the way we do it.
Yeah.
And he's a lot of fun to work with. I mean, he's
Absolutely.
funny
Yeah.
and engaging.
Engaging.
He always got great ideas, and he knows exactly what he wants. There's no question, and he won't let go until he gets it.
Yeah.
So
And then other times he does like to play and develop ideas and use the mix as an opportunity to. He goes, well, I know I had it that way, but that was an attempt. Let's go further with that. So it's a tough one.
I'll put you on the spot. Can you think of an example from Irishman about Marty getting on the stage and experimenting and playing?
well, the best example I can think of is we had mixed the film in Atmos, but we'd hardly used it. We just had a couple of sound effects and maybe a little bit in the music and some of the ambience we put in the ceiling. But we really kept it. I mean, we were directed from the beginning to keep it center,
Sure.
front and center.
Yeah.
So we got to the end title sequence, and Robbie had this great piece of music with these great guitar players. And Marty turned to us and says, we haven't used the Atmos at all. Why don't we do something with those guitars?
Let's open it up.
And
Yeah.
I was spinning them around, and
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun. We just had a blast with that.
That's great.
And that's probably the biggest Atmos moment in the film.
It reminds me of something that you and I talked about on Life of Pi. That it was actually in a lot of cases early on in Atmos, it was the music departments that got excited about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they realized that there was an opportunity for them to kind of pull some stuff off the screen and not have to fight with dialogue and effects
Exactly.
in the front three channels.
Yeah. The composer himself, Michael Dano, came in and fell in love with the idea of moving things off the screen and more spatially. But I was thinking, a direct answer to Marty wanting to develop something further was in another movie we did. In Departed, it really developed on the stage all by itself. Was the idea that the cell phones were switchblades, and this was their fighting tool. This is what they were going into battle with, and you know, he becomes very enthusiastic, and you work from there to develop it further. It's fun.
Yeah, yeah. So Netflix was part of the deal from the beginning on this film. You guys knew that you know, it was a Netflix show and that it was going to be on the streaming platform. Did that affect the way you approach the mix at all, or?
No, not really.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, we knew from the beginning that it was going to be a focused mix.
Sure.
We weren't, I mean, even though Atmos was a delivery requirement, we knew from the start that we probably weren't going to be using much of it.
Yeah.
That not many people were going to be seeing it in that format. Most people were going to be seeing it at home.
Right.
Either in a home theater or maybe just out of their TV set. So the concept of the mix being restrained and centered and quiet was helpful in that sense.
Aesthetically, it worked for the movie, but it also technically
also
worked for
worked,
this, you know,
Yeah,
you
for
go
the
to
for
for the
most
home
people.
for the home theater mix.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, that's all the questions that I had for you guys. Any final thoughts on The Irishman?
Well, the movie itself, I got to say, it affected me on a very deep emotional level at the end. The last hour of that movie is just ripped my heart out.
Yeah.
And it was just a pleasure to work on a movie that affected me that deeply.
Right.
Yeah.
And probably continue to do so all the way through the process.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah. It's rare when you get to
Every time I would see that scene when he says, "And that was the day that my daughter walked out of my life."
Right.
It just ripped me up.
Yeah, and man, and those performances.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah, truly, it's an honor to be a part of the process. And regardless of the complexity of the track, it's still a beautiful film. And that's a testament to his direction. It's incredible that it doesn't have to be the sum of all the parts to say it's itself already, you know, brilliant. Those performances are the point of making a movie.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And to me, it's not. It's more about everything. Every decision about the making of this film was about stripping away everything that's not necessary and just making it about capturing those performances. And I think you guys did an admirable job of supporting that from a sound perspective.
Yeah, and it's tricky. It's hard work.
It's actually harder than piling a bunch of sound effects
Right.
on it. Sure.
It's certainly equally as challenging, if not more so, to come up with something that's subtle and, again, not even effectively subtle. It's not like, oh yeah, there was this really cool sound. No, there's no sound in it, but we still had to have sound.
Of course,
and that was very important to them. Like I've said in some interviews, the bed sheet rustle in the scene where they're in their pajamas and they're you know, that was a really critical scene.
Yeah.
That
Everything's got to be perfect.
Yeah, and it wasn't like perfect, like give me all this cool perfect stuff. It was like, no, one thing there once, and that's what's going to sell that cut or that pause in the dialogue.
How long was the mix?
I forget.
About 2.5 months.
Yeah.
I think we started on
for a movie
July
that's almost
1st, and I
4
think we
hours long.
finished after Labor Day, so, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah,
second week in September.
yeah, that's right. We started filing like July 21st.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was doing dialogue pre-dub starting
Right.
the 1st of July.
and then we went till after Labor Day.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to think it's a 3.5-hour movie that is double the length.
It's like mixing two movies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the Cinema Audio Society nominations just came out yesterday. You guys got a nomination for this. Congratulations. And you are going to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award at the CAS
I am
in February.
very honored by that.
Which
But
is
I'm not
amazing.
finished. I'm not done.
No, of course not. That's an amazing honor. And word on the street is that Mr. Scorsese is going to present the award to you.
That's
so
what I hear.
what an amazing honor.
Yeah, it
Truly,
is.
That's
well
gonna be-
deserved.
It's going to be a great night for you. Well, congratulations to you both.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on the show, talking to us about The Irishman and about
Always a pleasure,
Thelma
Glenn.
and Marty and working on all these great films.
Yeah.
This is Glenn Kaiser from the Dolby Institute. Thanks for tuning in.